Good morning and welcome to the February 27th Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of St. Petersburg. My name is Ben Atherton Zeman. I am the minister here, and that was the historic bell that was installed by Lori's father. Lori Clement brought it to us just now. Thank you, Lori. I'm excited to bring you today's worship service along with Lori and a whole bunch of wonderful worship team members, featuring today's worship associate and the first person to do the view from the pew, Rebecca Wilson.
Thanks, Ben. We are a people of many beliefs. But we share a common faith that what we do in this world matters and that we are connected to one another and the planet. Whoever you are, wherever you are in your journey, you are welcome here. I want to give a special welcome to any newcomers. If you want a church where we work for peace in Ukraine, peace in our homes, and peace in our hearts, I have good news. You may have found your church home. We have a few announcements before we get started. Next week, we will be live in person in the sanctuary. The safety team tells us. Woo! We will wear a mask. We will sit in every other pew, and there will be ventilation. Coffee hour will still be virtual.
Thanks, Rebecca. I have a colleague should I unplug the wired mic or? No? Okay, you got it. I have a colleague named Reverend Catherine Dearlove from the Metropolitan Community Church, and I was so happy that she asked her fellow clergy to co-sign a letter opposing the Don't Say Gay bill. So I was pleased to sign that bill. We already talked about the view from the pew that Rebecca is going to be doing this week. So that is a new feature of our worship service. And let us know how you like it.
Today,
All right, thanks. So if those that didn't hear, Reverend Leah Cannon's going to teach a new member class. I'll be there today at 1 o'clock behind the church here, and anyone is welcome. And then this Wednesday at noon, there'll be a vigil for peace in the Ukraine. We got a call from this wonderful guy, Reverend Guillermo, from the UCC Church in Passagril. And I'm looking forward to meeting him in person, and I hope you will come with us to do that vigil at the Ukrainian Catholic Church Wednesday at noon. Janae Johnson is bringing us today's Time for All Ages. John Arterton and James Mack are providing the music, along with Aaron Cassette, Annie Hall, Lori Clement, Rebecca Wilson, and Fred Seidel off the boat for the first time in many times. Good to see you, Fred. Kelly Olson is live streaming along with Marissa Pohl, and today's greeters are Karen White and Linda Paul. Now let's take a moment to center ourselves for worship.
Our flaming chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. It is a symbol of hope, the sacred, the quest for truth, the warmth of community, the light of reason, and so much more. When Reverend Ben lights our chalice, I invite you to say our covenant out loud. The words can be found in the text chat. Please follow along with the hand movements. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Our reading this morning is a poem for Ukraine. It's called Pray by UU minister Reverend Robin Tanner. It was published yesterday. Pray to be brave when fear is catching you. We have to be brave because of the children. She is clear-eyed, flushed, and leaning against a steel column in a subway station. One child sleeping against her leg. The older boy staring, round, brown eyes fixed on his resolute, rosy-cheeked mother. Pray to be clear, to speak truth. She offers sunflower seeds to the Russian soldier before she curses him. She reminds him that he will die for a dictator who asks him to betray their humanity. Before she curses, she levels her eyes to this young man to remind him she could be his grandmother, she unarmed and ready to fight. Take this truth. If you will die here, remember, the flowers will grow again. Pray to endure when the waves crash over your head. My grandmother's hands, Ukrainian hands, always with a long, slim cigarette, even as she moved the hand mixer and sipped cold coffee. My not understanding the meaning of chocolate cake with raspberry sauce. Until this moment, staring generations forward at the rosy-cheeked mother, the weary lines that hid a world war, and the endurance in the ocean of grief to mix, bake, find life in depression. Pray to resist, even if your name will never matter. Ordinary people under a fascist, ordinary people who in a moment grabbed a coat, made a sign, and stood in the public places, knowing they will disappear, die without fame or name, who resist because someday they will say, not all the people were silent. Pray to love enough to cry and kiss the head of your child, filling their pockets with sunflower seeds as they board the last bus out of town, hands pressed to windows as one last ritual of love, because we know we may not see the sunrise, but someday, when the sunflowers bloom, they will return to harvest seeds again, to feel the warmth of sun, and to sit quietly before the arching, open bursts of yellow that mark the memory and prophecy. We have to be brave because of the children. Pray for peace, yes. Pray for the truth also. Pray for endurance, amen. Pray for resistance. Pray to remember that love that can never be bombed, obliterated, or silenced. The children, the flowers, and the sun return.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And now we come to the time in our worship service for joys, sorrows, and concerns. The service is being brought to you by YouTube Live, so please type your joys, your sorrows, into the text chat. If you have a joy, sorrow, or concern to submit during the week, please write to me, minister@uustpete.org. And if you want that to remain off of YouTube, let me know when you submit it. And right now, Peter Elam, thank you, will be placing a stone in the water for each one that was submitted this week, and there were quite a few once again. Edna Whistler and many others submitted stones asking for prayers for the innocent civilians in Ukraine, so our first stone will be for that.
Next, a stone of sorrow from Kelly DeGraw, who has lost people close to her in recent months. She's asking for continued strength for herself and those around us, for keeping heads high and helping those we can, however we can.
Another stone of sorrow for Patty Kane Wood on the loss of her dog, Blue. He was a special boy and a good dog. Patty, we're sending love to Lynn and you.
A stone of joy from Kimberly Weiss. The City of St. Pete workers have reached a tentative contract with the city, and the SEIU FPSU keeps fighting for rent control.
A stone from Karen Cole in remembrance of Mike Timpane, who's an educator, visionary, and a good friend.
A stone of concern from Bridget Oya, asking us to please pray for Steve, Megan, and Noreen. And a stone of joy from Gretchen Stewart for the life of Reverend Ben and kind people and the opportunity to show love to others.
Thank you, Gretchen. A stone of concern from my friend Elaine Nussbaum. Elaine's husband David has just been diagnosed with cancer. So please pray for them and send love. Then we place the final stone for those joys and sorrows that remain in our hearts, perhaps too tender yet to be spoken out loud. Let's take a moment of silence together. The mystery is that we are connected, even when we feel apart. So let us rejoice in our beloved community that makes of the many one. So may it be.
Rebecca and I was almost dancing for a second. Good morning. My name is Janae Johnson, and I'm here to share this wonderful story called Desmond Gets Free. I can't show you the pictures, but I tell you, check it out at the library. So this story is dedicated for all those working to build a new world of justice, equity, and compassion. Desmond the Mouse lived in the most beautiful meadow in all the land. Every morning, Desmond woke with the sunrise and would spend the day playing in the meadow. And every evening, Desmond would go to sleep in the middle of the meadow under that beautiful starry sky. One night, though, Desmond awoke when it was still dark out. He tried to roll over to a more comfortable spot, but something wasn't right. Desmond realized that his tail was stuck right under the ground and beginning to throb with pain. He felt behind him there was a huge boulder that seemed to have fallen in the middle of the meadow just on his tail. Desmond pushed the boulder and tugged on his tail. He pushed on the boulder and tugged on his tail. He pushed and tugged and pushed and tugged, but it was no use. When he was out of breath, he had just about given up, and then he saw a giraffe nearby in the grass. Good news, he thought. "Oh, giraffe," he cried, "could you please push the boulder a few inches to the other direction so I can go free?" The giraffe looked at Desmond and laughed the way giraffes do. "Silly mouse," said the giraffe. "That's no boulder. It's an elephant that's fallen asleep in the middle of the meadow just on your tail." "Well, if you could just wake the elephant and ask him to roll over a few inches in the other direction, I can go free." "Well," replied the giraffe, "you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie." I find it's best to not get involved in other animals' business. I find it best to remain neutral in times like this. Desmond quietly replied, well, I don't appreciate your neutrality. The giraffe wandered off, and Desmond tried calling out to the elephant to wake him up, but those giant ears were too far away on the side of the giant elephant body. So he tugged and he pushed, but it was no use. And when he was out of breath, a gazelle roamed by. "Oh, gazelle," he cried. "Oh, gazelle, it seems that an elephant has fallen asleep on my tail in the middle of this meadow. I'm stuck and it hurts. I wonder if you can ask him to wake and move a few inches so I can be free." "Well," said the gazelle, "I see your problem there, but you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie, and I find it best to not get involved in other animals' business. I find it best to remain neutral in times like these." Desmond replied almost to himself this time, "I don't appreciate neutrality." Desmond tried again to call out to the elephant. He tried to push him away. He tried, but it was no use. And once again, he was out of breath. Then he saw another mouse wandering through the meadow. "My name is Nelson." "Nelson, this giant elephant has fallen asleep on my tail in the middle of this meadow. I wonder if you might run over and call out to his giant ears and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction so I can go free?" Desmond asked. "Of course," said Nelson. Nelson ran all the way to the other end of the giant elephant body and called up to those giant elephant ears at the top of that giant elephant head, but he did not budge. He heard the mouse, but he was too comfortable to move. Nelson ran back to Desmond, a little out of breath. "I have an idea. Don't move." He ran off. "I won't," muttered Desmond. A little while later, he emerged through the tall grass, and he wasn't alone. He had found 3 other mouse friends that gathered even more friends to come bring even more friends to help Desmond. The whole group of them ran over to the giant elephant head. One mouse scrambled on top of the shoulders of another and another and another, and finally they made a ladder right up to the top side of the elephant. At last, Nelson climbed up, one on top of the other, and he was standing right next to his ear. "Excuse me," he called out. "It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of this meadow. I wonder if you could just roll over a few inches in the other direction so that he might go free." The elephant made a loud groan. "I'm comfortable, go away." So Nelson asked more of his mouse friends to climb up. One by one, they helped each other get to the side of the elephant. They called out into his head. The loud groan continued. "I'm comfortable just where I am, go away." Then Nelson had an idea. They wanted to yell together, "Excuse us. It seems you have fallen asleep on our friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. Roll over a few inches in the other direction so he can go free." This time, all of those voices together right next to the elephant's ear were too loud to ignore. "I was too comfortable where I was, but I'll move over if you just agree to stop making such a racket," said the elephant. Then he rolled over just a few inches in the other direction. Nelson and the other mice helped each other climb back down, and Desmond was finally free. Desmond and Nelson and all their mouse friends spent the rest of that beautiful day playing in the middle of that beautiful meadow. And a quote by Archbishop Desmond Tutu: "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality." So about Desmond Mopilo Tutu, born October 7th of 1931. He was a South African Anglican cleric and theologian who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984 for his work as an anti-apartheid and human rights activist. He was a bishop of Johannesburg from 1985 to 86, and then he was the Archbishop of Cape Town from 86 to 96. In both cases, he was the first Black African to hold the position. Thank you.
The stream sings it to the river sings it to the sea. Sea sings it to the boat that carries you and me. Somos al barco, somos al mar. Yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the sea. I sail in you, you sail in me. The boat we are sailing on was built by many hands. The sea we are sailing on touches many lands. Somos al barco, somos al mar. Yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the stream. I sail in you, you sail in me. So with our hopes we raise the sails to face the winds once more. And with our hearts we chart the waters never sailed before. Somos al barco, somos al mar. Yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the sea. I sail in you, you sail in me. The voyage has been long and hard, and yet we're sailing still, with a song to help us pull together if we only will. Somos al barco, somos al mar. Yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the sea. I sail in you, you sail in me. I sail in you, you sail in me.
Widening Worship? I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, First Baptist Church of St. Petersburg, right across from Williams Park. That church has moved on, and so have I. As I grew, I developed a wider belief system, not confined to the teachings of the King James Bible. Some 30 years ago, I stumbled on some Unitarian Universalists at a war protest in Lafayette Park across from the White House. Getting to know those folks and visiting a UU church, I learned that my beliefs were more aligned with those of UU. As a child in the Baptist church, what meant the most to me, aside from the congregational singing, was the knowledge, the feeling really, that there was a community of grown-ups who cared about me. The church was a community of people who cared about one another and the people around them, cared about all the people in the world. That knowledge, that feeling, that belief stayed with me. As a Unitarian Universalist, my spiritual leader is less likely to be Jesus of Nazareth and more likely to be the musician Toshi Regan or the poet Mary Oliver or the Afrofuturist writer Octavia Butler or the 13th century Persian poet Rumi. But I still see my church as a community of people who care about each other and take responsibility to take care of the community, the larger world, and the planet we live on. When I retired and moved back to St. Petersburg 5 years ago, I headed straight for the Unitarian Universalist Church of St. Petersburg. I was looking for a place and a group of people with whom I could build community. I didn't come for the minister, I came for the community. And these days, when I'm feeling lonely, I know I need to call or text or email someone. I need to reach out to people in my community, check on someone to see if they're lonely too, or if they need anything. Widening the circle is not a new concept to me. I first heard about it as a quote from Albert Einstein. I was introduced to Einstein's statement about widening the circle of compassion when I lived in the Washington, D.C. area, and a new charity, something like St. Petersburg's Daystar Life Center that we support here, this new charity was created, and its mission was to end poverty. The charity was named A Wider Circle. Apparently, Einstein first wrote his message about widening the circle of compassion in German. Here's how I heard it translated. A human being is part of a whole called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. A human experiences itself, its thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of its consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty? That sounds like what we try to do as Unitarian Universalists. Care for everyone and everything. Discovering Unitarian Universalism widened my concept of worship.
I was so nervous at my first sermon. It was for my internship congregation in Nashua, New Hampshire. I worked on it for weeks. I asked Lucinda to look at it. I asked my friends to look at it. I asked Lucinda to look at it again. Finally, so the Sunday came. I got up, delivered the sermon, full house in the sanctuary, hopefully what we'll get next week. People made good eye contact like you all are making now, and they even looked at each other sometimes like this little nodding type of thing. They laughed at my jokes. So after the worship service ended, we had a receiving line. This was pre-COVID, and everyone wanted to shake my hand, say, "What a wonderful sermon. That was so inspiring. It was so moving." I was over the moon. So I couldn't wait for my supervising meeting with my supervising minister, Reverend Allison Palm. I was eager for her to tell me how well I had done, how great my preaching skills were, and what an asset I was going to be to the denomination. She did think the sermon was good. She asked me how much time I'd spent on it. I told her about weeks and weeks, and this past week, 15 hours this week alone. She said that was too much time. She said that when I'm a full-time minister and not an intern, writing sermons is going to be about 1/100th of my job. She said if I spend 15 hours a week writing, I'd have spent almost half my time doing 1% of my job. And she asked me how the music had been chosen. I said, well, I asked Jed, our music director, our equivalent of John, and he gave me these ideas, and I thought they were good. Then she asked me about the readings. I said, well, the worship associate picked the readings, and there was one I really wanted that I liked, and I've always wanted to do that, is the reading, and she just kept asking questions like that, and basically told me I did it all wrong. I said, what do you mean? Don't you remember I told you that everyone shook my hand and said it was great? Reverend Allison said I have to stop focusing on writing a sermon. Reverend Allison told me I have to start thinking about how to shape a worship service. What's the main message? How can the readings, the hymns, the anthem contribute to that message? She wanted me to practice shared ministry, from the choosing of the worship topics itself, which was done through the worship team, on down to shaping each individual worship service, done in collaboration with the music team, the worship associate, our director of faith formation, anyone involved in that particular worship service. It turns out I had been unconsciously influenced by many church stereotypes. And this particular stereotype is the worship is focused on the sermon, that the music and the readings and everything else are less important. Their function to support the sermon, like Christmas decorations on a tree. Now, part of that stereotype is that the minister's words are somehow more important than the musician's words or the religious educator's words. The minister in this stereotype is an old cisgender white guy like me, isolated from the congregation, maybe from the world, spending countless hours writing the perfect, well-researched sermon in his office. On the other hand, the religious educator and the musicians are much more likely to be women, to be people of color, to be LGBTQ, trans, non-binary, to be younger. Today's worship service is the final one for February, and we've had the theme that about 100 other churches have, widening the circle. We've chosen worship service topics based on a brainstorm done by the worship team. I largely did not choose the topics. The month began with Reverend Jay Wolin urging us to widen our definition of love to include agape, then continued with Stephanie and Kathleen describing their widened experiences with Unitarian Universalism. And finally, I talked last week about widening the circle, and this week we're exploring the concept of widening the worship experience, starting with Rebecca's view from the pew. And these past few years, many of us have had to widen the worship experience to include online worship. I'm thrilled to return to in-person worship next week, but for accessibility reasons, our worship at UU St. Pete will always remain a hybrid experience. Some people are not able to leave their homes for reasons of age, disability, and so forth. And for those of us who cannot leave our homes, online worship is the only way we can worship or work or attend meetings or build community. UU St. Pete has widened the worship experience to include you, and we aren't going back. I've also led worship service several times here alongside Beth Stombaugh. Even though she was leading worship with me, she was unable to do so from the pulpit because our church was constructed with only certain people in mind, with only certain bodies in mind. If ministers like Reverend Teresa Nainan Soto were ever to be a guest speaker here, they would face the same structural injustice. But thanks to the work of the facilities master plan annual review team, we were figuring out how to make both our chancel and eventually our buildings accessible for everyone. For many UU congregations, including ours, our membership is also overwhelmingly white, older, cisgender people. In principle, we support widening the circle to involve people of color. In practice, many people of color report micro and macro aggressions leveled against them by well-meaning UU white people. Worship practices are just one aspect of the church experience. But even there, people of color report feeling at best marginalized, out of place, and at worst actively harmed by our common worship practices. White worship leaders, in prioritizing the comfort of our white members, have unintentionally made worship spaces unsafe for many people of color. Today I'll speak of 3 common UU worship practices that may be restricting our ability to widen the circle. I've already spoken about centering the sermon as one example. The other 2 are emphasis on quiet contemplation and avoiding God language. Many UUs of all races have experienced religious trauma in other faith traditions, so some come here looking for a place where we don't say the words God or Jesus, maybe looking for a minister who doesn't look like their old minister or doesn't wear a robe. But Darrow K. Farber, the director of music for First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon, says that atheism is largely a white thing. Farrar doesn't mean there are no atheists of color, but Farrar cites a Pew study where 11% of white adults believe there is no God as compared to 2% of black adults. Farrar contends people of color have, by and large, clung to their beliefs in God in whatever form, not because they are insufficiently educated, but because it is God who has given them the strength to endure, resist, and, in some small ways, overcome systems of racism and white supremacy. Farrar believes that any movement in Unitarian Universalism to make God unwelcome in our sanctuaries is effectively akin to posting whites-only signs on our doors. If we at UU St. Pete embrace theists as much as we embrace atheists and agnostics, I believe our worship and our community will be the richer for it. Indeed, sharing deeply about our spiritual journeys is why some of you are here. Michael Pohl, in our last transition team meeting, recounted being on the committee on ministry when Reverend Manish Mishra was your minister, and sometimes half of those COM meetings were spent sharing deeply personal spiritual journeys. Michael said he looked forward to those meetings precisely for that reason. And I was very moved when Michael said that. I too have longed for a place to share deeply about my own spiritual journey and hear others' spiritual journeys, but frankly, I have not prioritized such conversations as much as I could have. And I promise to remedy that. Right after church services today, as we said, our new member class will invite the members to share their personal spiritual journeys. And maybe in some meeting you're attending this week, like the meeting we had about the church worship calendar, right, Kelly? We will begin the meeting by asking the question, what is your concept of God? To paraphrase Rebecca, whether you're inspired by Jesus of Nazareth, the musician Toshi Reagan, the poet Mary Oliver, or the Afro-futurist writer Octavia Butler, or the 13th century Persian poet Rumi, I hope you still see your church as a community of people who care about each other and take responsibility to take care of that community, take care of the larger world, the planet we live on. So this Wednesday at noon, many of us will stand vigil at the Ukrainian Catholic Church, alongside many who might not share our worship practices or our theology. This vigil will widen our circle for one moment in the name of peace and in the name of our shared humanity. May we have the humility to open our hearts and learn from these folks who may not worship as we do. Now, some traditionally white churches welcome people of color into shared worship only to express discomfort at the volume of singing, the style of music, or the talking back when the minister is speaking. I've heard that one of my predecessors had a rule against applause and against laughter during worship. A few weeks ago, down the street behind me, my fellow minister, Reverend Kenneth Irby, encourages exactly that kind of talk back, exactly that kind of applause. And when I attended there, the historic Bethel AME Church, I could not help but rise from my seat to clap, to say hallelujah. And Reverend Irby, he would sprinkle his worship service with phrases like, oh, I wish there was someone here who could testify to, and he'd say that like in the middle of, before he made his point. And that was the cue. People would say, amen, and they'd shout something. The pressure to have a silent, contemplative worship doesn't just affect people of color. At the UU Church in Nashua, when I was an intern, we created a family worship area. We actually removed some of the venerable pews and created a family worship area for families with toddlers and babies. Some of the older white UUs complained they were used to a quieter sanctuary. Young parents countered that was the only way they were able to participate in the worship service. And my teaching pastor, Reverend Allison, herself a mother of young children, told us this isn't just for the young parents, that the children themselves participate in worship in ways that are valuable to them and to us. By being in the sanctuary, kids learn about lighting the chalice, about joys and sorrows, about singing, about giving to the collection plate. Tolerating extra sound in the sanctuary might make some of us uncomfortable. Not tolerating that sound might alienate and exclude young parents, people of color, young parents of color, and the children themselves. So while I am minister here, whenever you are moved by music or by words, you may feel free to applaud. And if someone says something funny, whether or not we intentionally mean it to be funny, feel free to laugh out loud. The no applauding, no laughing rule is not in place while I'm the minister here. And finally, I already talked about the sermon, or it's called here the reflection, more accurately, I think. Again, Reverend Allison taught me about shared ministry introduced me to the practice of lay leaders taking responsibility for every part of the worship service, even down to the selection of topics. Decentering the sermon, sharing the ministry also works to decenter whiteness and patriarchal norms. Shared ministry engages the congregation in this, our essential work, not just to worship, but to transform ourselves and the world. So last worship team, when Susan Bernor suggested trying something new called the view from the pew, worship leaders will choose someone to share their view from the pew, try to choose people other than the usual suspects, so we can see a variety of our congregants in the pulpit. The worship topics are already on the website through mid-April, so if any of you want to volunteer for the view from the pew, please contact me or anyone else on the worship team. Everything we try here is an experiment. I've only been here 7 months, but I already know you're not shy with your opinions, so let me know what you think about view from the pew or anything else. And our worship services will not be perfect. We will have feedback. We will have a dance of who goes next, like these folks modeled. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not please everyone. That's not their job, and it's not mine. We will try to provide comfort, especially right now when so many are hurting. But I can guarantee that everyone will be made uncomfortable at some point by something we do, by something I do. In divinity school, they told me my job was to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. If we widen our circle to make it a safer space for people of color, for trans and non-binary people, for two-spirit people, for people with disabilities, it may not be comfortable for many of us. After we opened up the family worship area in Nashua, one of the older white congregants came up to us. She said, "I'm used to quiet, contemplative worship. Having small children right in the middle of the sanctuary during worship makes me uncomfortable." And she stopped for a minute. And she said, "And I'm okay with being uncomfortable." I used to think of worship services as a vehicle for ministry, like a boat we sail to this destination of our beloved community. But today's beautiful anthem that you all sang reminds me worship services are not just the vehicles, not just the boats. Today's anthem reminds me that somos el barco, that we are the boat. Somos el mar, we are the sea. It's not some separate group that brings us worship, does our transition work, makes our policy and our board, builds the kitchen right next door. It's us. It's this community. It's you. It's not an isolated cisgender white guy giving a sermon. Yo navego en ti. I sail in you. Tu navegas en mi. You sail in me. And as we sail together, some extra voices, some extra sound, extra applause, extra laughter in the sanctuary will make some of us uncomfortable. And if we don't tolerate this discomfort, if like the elephant we choose to remain asleep, we may alienate and exclude young parents, people of color, young parents of color. So let us get used to some discomfort in the name of widening the circle, in the name of our beloved community, in the name of UU St. Pete, of our community, of our denomination, and of our future. Amen. And blessed be.
Ashe. Now let us remember our connection to one another, and let us not forget our contributions to support the means to those connections. If you are a newcomer here, please refrain from making a donation. This service is our gift to you, and your presence is your gift to us. The link to give is in the description box below your screen. You can also donate through the Vanco Faith Engagement mobile app or on our website under the Giving tab at uustpete.org, or by sending a check to the church. Many thanks.
I look forward to seeing many of you in person next week, those who can, and the rest of you, we will see you online and YouTube Live. Many will be joining us after this in our virtual coffee hour in Zoom. Like Desmond the Mouse, may we be blessed with friends who refuse to be neutral, who wake up the elephant and get it off our friend's tail. Someday when the sunflowers bloom, they will return to harvest seeds again, to feel the warmth of sun, and to sit quietly before the arching, open bursts of yellow that mark the memory and prophecy. Amen. Blessed be. Ashe. Now feel free to follow along with the hand gestures as Rebecca extinguishes our chalice. The words to UU St. Pete's traditional chalice extinguishing are in the text chat. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world. Go in peace.